Again, thank you for being here. I'm Shelley Carlton. I wanted to convey that the program goal is net zero buildings, as many as we can get. And that means different things for different people, and that definition is going to change over time. But change is good. Innovation is not really possible without the type of research, communication, and diverse perspectives that we bring with this grant. So what I'm really hoping is that after this, you'll learn a little bit more about the grant, and you'll be inspired to bring those ideas that may already be percolating to the grant so we can support you in doing research and really thinking beyond the boundaries about how you can innovate in new commercial construction or major renovations to bring more net zero buildings onto the grid. I think we know that innovation is more important than ever with the challenges we're facing. So I really appreciate your interest, and I hope you'll bring something to us this year. It's exciting work.
Thanks, Shelley. So a few other logistics. So we just talked about the goals. If you're just joining us, we just talked about the goals of the fellowship. You heard from Shelley Carlton from Energy Trust, and a couple more kind of critical things to know about the fellowship. So the funding is to advance these goals, so address key barriers and grow the community of practice. If you work for a firm that is registered to do business in Oregon and/or Washington, you are eligible to apply. You do not have to be a resident of one of these states, but you have to work for a firm that does work in one of these states. So hopefully that makes sense. We expanded eligibility to include Washington last year. We're super excited about really the potential to bring regional thought leaders and even national thought leaders who are doing work in the Northwest into this fellowship. So as Shelley mentioned, the topics must be relevant to new commercial construction. That includes major renovation, and it also includes multifamily. And Energy Trust defines multifamily as buildings with stacked housing or those with shared common areas and shared systems. And we typically award 1 to 2 grants per year, up to $60,000 per fellow for research that's conducted over about 12 months, give or take. Next. Okay. So we have had 11 fellows to date since we started the offer in 2017. We have delivered over $500,000 of funding to these fellows. So 8 of them have completed their research, starting with Shilpa back in 2017. And it's been a mix of architects, engineers, developers, academics, kind of wide range of the folks that we know touch commercial new construction projects. And we've had research topics related to cost, affordable housing, embodied carbon, resilience, district scale solutions, schools. We've got a pretty great mix. I'll share the research completed to date in a moment. And as you can tell from the photos, it's been people at all phases of their career. So not just what you might think of as fellows, sort of seasoned professionals towards the end of their career, but we've had young folks, in their 20s, pretty fresh out of school, who've had compelling ideas, and we're really interested in supporting young professionals in this work as well. And many of these folks are, have continued to advise our work and inform the program, and really continue to be thought leaders and advisors in the industry. And their work has led them to, as you'll hear from Jean Root soon, has led them to new opportunities. Next slide. So all of the research that's conducted it gets posted to Energy Trust website and lives on and becomes a resource. So I encourage you to take a look, if you have not already, at the Net Zero Fellowship Grants website, because you can take a look at the 8 research projects that have been completed to date. 3 of our fellows are still working on in-process projects. But going back to 2017, you can see the kinds of projects that have been completed and the range of topics. Next slide. So this year's fellowship application timeline and all this information is available in the application instructions and online, and I'm happy to share slides as well. So as you know, the application is currently open. We are accepting questions and clarifications through March 20th. So we've got a little bit more of a formal process this year around the Q&A because we had a lot of questions last year. So that might look a little bit different. If you have a question, the request is that you submit it to newbuildings@energytrust.org. That email is in the chat, and it's also in the application instructions. You can ask anything you want, clarification, question, topic ideas, and then we will respond to all of the questions at once and post them on the website on April 1st. Applications are due to Energy Trust on May 3rd. And then in June and July, they will be reviewed by what we call our Net Zero Advisory Panel. We convene every year a group of about 15 folks who are experienced practitioners in this work in some aspect of the work. They might not be sort of super advanced technical experts, but they might have deep relationships in the community. We try to have a pretty diverse group of folks come together to take the time to review the applications. They score all of them based on a standard scoring rubric that Energy Trust provides. And they're really helping think through, which of these ideas are going to most effectively advance the performance of new construction projects in Oregon. And we typically have follow-up questions for the top 3 to 5 applicants. So we will get those questions out, request responses to be submitted from those finalists by July 1st. Award the fellowship sometime in July, and do contracting in early fall, and then the research begins. And so fellows have about a year to do the work. We typically have one fellow present in the fall and one in the spring. So if you're thinking about timeline, we would probably have one fellow submit in the fall of 2025 and another in the spring of 2026. That's right. Yep. So about a year to 18 months in terms of actually getting the final presentation complete. Next slide. So the application instructions include these topics of interest. As Shelley and I both mentioned, we are most interested in hearing from you all around what topics you think should be researched and what topics you think merit a great fellowship project. But we did want to share some of the things that are of interest to Energy Trust, and you'll see these themes in the work completed to date by previous fellows. So at a high level, this idea of how designers and owners make decisions is really of interest. We know that there are many factors beyond just energy that go into a design and owner's decision-making process. And so we're interested in understanding all of those factors from, cost to occupant health to energy, and how they relate to energy in particular. And then the other high-level theme is how to bring benefits to communities that have been historically underserved, particularly from the perspective of energy investments, and how to ensure that this research and work brings benefits to them. And so from Energy Trust perspective, some of those historically underserved communities include rural communities, communities with low income, and BIPOC communities, as well as small firms and small businesses who might not have access to as deep a capital stack or be able to afford more expensive consultants to help bring particular technical expertise to their team. So those are some of the kind of underserved communities that Energy Trust is particularly interested in supporting. And then some of the specific topic areas are around cost benefit, understanding the incremental cost of energy investments, and potentially looking at life cycle cost analysis of an entire project, benefits and tools for communities, as I talked about below, how to make sure that this research is relevant to people who can most benefit from it. Understanding greenhouse gas emissions, both carbon and other emissions that affect the climate and are related, we know, to energy efficiency and energy decisions. But and to this next topic, the carbon emissions from grid supplied energy, they often go hand in hand, but there's sometimes there's decisions that need to be evaluated between energy efficiency and greenhouse gas emissions, and so what that implication is for design teams. Grid interactive efficient buildings is of increasing interest to Energy Trust, and how to ensure that the combination of efficiency and passive design strategies in a building are able to bring increased grid resilience. Ventilation and indoor air quality has been particularly topical coming out of the pandemic and the additional strategies and energy implications of how to ensure high quality indoor air. Occupant engagement could look like a range of things, but here some of the interest is around the engagement that we know is critical from people who are actually using the buildings and the impact that that has on energy and carbon emissions. Solar and resilience as the combination of solar and battery storage as a resilience strategy. And then building conversion is a topic increasingly, I think, discussed in the market, and this could look like a range of conversion strategies, but one that's particularly topical for the program is the idea of converting existing office buildings into multifamily buildings or resilience hubs and repurposing some of the existing office buildings that are no longer used in the same way or as significantly post-pandemic. Next. So what the Net Zero Advisory Panel and Energy Trust are looking for in applications are strength and comprehensiveness, relevance to the region, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how that advances Energy Trust goals. And you can see Energy Trust's DEI plan. I think there's a link in the application instructions, the quality of the research topic, and the applicant's expertise and capacity to do this work, to deliver on the proposed concept, and instill confidence in the applicant's ability to deliver on the proposed approach. And then the potential for the work to advance the market and meet market transformation goals, and then other potential criteria. Next. A few other things that I wanted to share because I often get questions about this. Research projects often include collaboration with others. In fact, I think in the last couple of years, all of the submissions we've received have been an individual fellow plus a team of other consultants or colleagues. So we do require that there is one identified fellow who is the research lead. That's the named fellow. But in all the cases of the recent grantees, there's been a team of folks that support them, and we want to know who your proposed collaborators are in your proposal. The work usually includes some type of research report. You can define what that looks like. And then there's often some sort of supplemental resource, whether it's a tool, could be a simple spreadsheet tool, something more complicated, case studies, something that can be used by other project teams to advance the work that you've begun. And then increasingly, getting the word out about this work is a priority. So we want to know about your proposed dissemination plan. So Energy Trusts always hosts a webinar that goes out to our Oregon and Washington network. This gets recorded and turned into an on-demand training so that it's essentially a training that anyone can access going forward. It's eligible for continuing education credits, and we're doing more and more to promote those to ensure that the research stays relevant and gets out to an even wider audience. We also typically host in-person events, often one in Southern Oregon and one in Central Oregon. And then we are increasingly co-hosting these fellowship presentations with organizations that serve the communities most relevant to the research topic. And so you'll see in the application instructions that one of the things we'd love to know is which proposed organizations do you think would be a good fit to co-host this content, so that we're getting your amazing research and results out to beyond sort of the typical channels and to folks who would find it most relevant. And then this year, if you have looked at the fellowship application before or applied, we have created an online application. So the actual submission process is a little bit different. So we have a PDF application instructions that are on the website, and then there's actually an online form that you'll use to submit your proposal and any attachments. It's pretty easy and user-friendly, and will, I think, streamline the whole process. Next. Okay, and then because I have your attention, I want to just share one other grant opportunity, which is about to open. We also award grants to firms that are signatories of one of the national carbon commitments. So if you are an architect or engineer and your firm is a signatory to the AIA 2030, MEP 2040 for mechanical, electrical and plumbing engineers, or SE 2050 for structural engineers. If you're a signatory to one of these carbon commitments, I encourage you to keep an eye out for application info about our internship grant, which awards grants to firms to hire interns, student or young professional interns, to advance these national carbon commitments. And we support a cohort between these firms and interns. We typically have 4 to 6 interns per year, and it's a pretty great, fun program. And you can hire firms can hire interns from, it's at the firm's discretion to hire the interns, so they could come from anywhere in the state. And yeah, so keep an eye out for this. That's coming soon. And then next, I think we've got Jean. Okay, so Jean, I think you're here. So we are lucky to have Jean Root join us. Jean was a fellow a few years ago, and she is here to tell us about her research, her experience, and any recommendations for you all, and also here to help answer some questions that you all might have. Jean.
Hi, friends. What I think I'm going to do is I'm going to pull over actually for a second.
Yes, thank
Have this
you.
conversation.
Thanks for being here, Jean.
Yeah, so you caught me in the middle of a site visit on this beautiful sunny day. This is a wonderful, wonderful day for, you know, solar energy generation. So I hope we're all thinking that way today. All right, so Jean Root, MWA Architects. I'm a principal and director of sustainability at MWA here in Portland, sunny Portland, Oregon. And I had the pleasure of working on the connectivity between energy and our industrial projects that we develop at MWA. And there's so many other folks that do that kind of work, but it didn't get as much attention. It's kind of like the last guy, you know, the first guy is residential. The second guy might be commercial. The last guy in line was industrial. And I thought it was time. And so we attended to that issue. And what my curiosity and research point really was, and Naomi and I had lots of back and forth, and potentially I frustrated her a little, was I felt there was a really strong connectivity between what was going on in terms of policy and what was going on with our industrial type of projects, especially, and I was particularly interested in the industrial projects that each and every city and town and county and state entity has to develop. And they have policies and rules, but they were always so difficult to apply to industrial facilities. They weren't thinking about that first. It was always last. So that's what we did. And it ended up being a rather social energy study. We ended up talking to folks across Oregon in different places in their journey around energy policy and energy regulatory development within their communities around industrial developments. And it was pretty enlightening. And in the end, we had a two-part deliverable, and one was the results of those conversations, and the other was a short design guide just devoted to typical public industrial projects that we see. And that was our project. And just listening and looking at that list today, I want to do it all again. So I guess I'm here to make some recommendations and then tell you where I'm now and how that has affected me. So one recommendation I would make to folks who are considering applying is think about what you're excited about and will keep your attention for at least a year. It's often something that's been bothering you for at least 2 years, maybe 3, maybe 5, in my case, 20. And so it needs to be something that you would have done anyway, even if you didn't get the grant. And with the grant, it supports you financially, but money can't get you excited about the topic and keep you engaged. So make sure it's something that you personally are driven to spend time with. The other piece that in terms of recommendations while you're thinking about how to approach this, is really connecting your ideas back to what the priorities that Energy Trust has put forward. Energy Trust has put a lot of people energy into developing these priorities. And that's not something to just go around. it's really helpful actually as guidance as to what is actually making a difference. Their business is energy. So when you look at what they're interested in, if there's connectivity between what you're excited about and what they're saying are our priorities, you've got yourself a winning proposal. So looking at where I am now and how the fellowship affected my work, I will tell you at this point, I have doubled down on energy in our industrial projects. You know, that happens when somebody says you wrote the thing, you're now the subject matter expert, and you can't help but own it. And once you own it, then you're committed. So now I get excited about everything that happens around energy and industrial developments. And the industrial developments that I work on include things like airports. So when you think industrial, and I think industrial, they're slightly different opportunities. Sometimes it's water, wastewater treatment plants, sometimes it's transit facilities. These are the kinds of facilities that I'm targeting and thinking about. And you know, it really has affected my relationships. I have infinite relationships across Oregon now because of all those phone calls. People that I, regularly touch point with. It's like, what's going on? Have you been able to advance your goals? Where have they advanced to now? What can I do anything to help? Is there any space for me to step up and support you? And so that's been kind of my journey. So I am more than happy to answer any questions people have about what that all looked like from beginning to end. But I feel like, Naomi, you've done a really great job. And with that, I cede the mic.
Thank you so much, Jean. And I think one thing I should clarify, I think where Jean alluded to the frustration, it was not that I was frustrated. It was that Energy Trust does have some limitations around policy work it can do as it sits between utilities and the Oregon Public Utility Commission. And so I think a piece that's worth clarifying is we're not looking for proposals related to changing policies, but Jean's work was very much about like, what are the existing barriers and how can we develop solutions in that existing context and what needs to change culturally. So those proposals are very much welcome. I know there's some nuance there around the policy piece, but I just wanted to clarify that. Okay, well, I think with that, we're happy to take questions. We have a quick poll for the few of us that are here as you're thinking about your questions.
Okay, we just launched the poll, and the question in the poll is, after this info session, how likely are you to apply for this fellowship? More likely, less likely, or neutral? So I'll just give people a moment. I can see we have 71% in answering. Let's give it one more second. All right. Here we go.
Awesome. Thanks for playing along. Okay. Well, with this, we want to turn it over to you. Hear what your questions are, concerns, what you're thinking about. And I think we have Jean here. Maybe, yeah, if there's any specific questions for Jean, maybe let's start with those and then want to hear any other questions. And again, you're welcome to take yourself off mute. I encourage you to turn on your video if you're comfortable, and we'll just have a conversation. Maybe we answered it all. Any questions? Oh yeah, great.
I have a quick question. Talking about tools that come out of, can you expand a little more on that when you say you want something to come out of it that's being able to use by everybody? Is it something that's just going to be available on the Energy Trust as like a web-based tool, or how would the distribution happen?
Yeah, good question. So I guess a sort of high-level response is that this research is essentially jointly owned by the fellow and Energy Trust. So Energy Trust wants to be able to promote it and celebrate it, but we also very much encourage the fellow to get it out to as many people as you think can benefit from it and use your own channel. So there's no restrictions on like, this can only serve, you know, whatever tool you produce can only serve Energy Trust audience. In fact, I think there'd be a lot of interest in supporting something that has the potential to go far and wide. In terms of like what the tool looks like, I think that is pretty wide open as well. And again, yeah, I would say, don't think of limitations in terms of like what the tool is. I mentioned like a couple of them to date have been simple spreadsheet tools. I think other proposals have been along the lines of like plugins for different modeling software, or, you know, other types of sort of more sophisticated technological tools, if you will. And you also don't have to have a tool. Like in some cases, the research paper covers it, right? And there's some actions. What we are looking for is something that's actionable, that can really, you know, move the market and be used by design teams. But in some cases, that could be a set of recommendations, or in Jean's case, a resource guide. One of our fellows is working on a similar kind of toolkit currently. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
And one other thing that prompted me to think about, which often comes up as a question, is whether there can be additional funding, whether Energy Trust's funding can go towards a bigger project that has other sources of funding. And the answer to that is yes. And so when we ask for your budget, you know, the $60,000 you're, you know, proposing for the scope of Energy Trust work could very well be complemented by other funding that you have.
Oh, and speaking of budget, can you expand on how detailed it has to be?
Yeah, it does not have to be super detailed. We are looking for, you know, essentially rough staff costs, you know, any other direct costs. We'd want to see the, you know, the number of staff or the sort of different staff breakdown, but it doesn't have to be much more detailed than that, especially given the new simplified submission platform we have, where you're essentially copying and pasting a budget in there as text. So, so simple is fine.
Hey, Naomi, can I pop in there? This is Jean.
Please, yeah.
I think it's important to note to everyone that you should be thinking about a scope, schedule, and budget. So that's the trio. You got to have them to win the support, because you need to have, like, what is the schedule for how you're actually going to deliver it? Does it work for what the Energy Trust schedule is? Do you have any special requests because it's actually being built and you have limited control over that, or something like that? You know, include that kind of detail about, you know, what is it? And then the scope should be, you know, what are you actually doing? And what are the outcomes? And what are the meetings or deliverables? And what are the activities, you know, that you actually need to do to complete that work, to get to those deliverables? And how are you going to disseminate it is like one of the top things for Energy Trust. They're like, it's not just for you and me to hold on to tightly to our chest. This is about put it out there and get it into the world and make this world a better place. It's a pretty altruistic grant, and I love it for that. And to that end, you finally need to, you know, have your budget. So your budget should very directly relate to the activities, the deliverables, any kinds of meetings or dissemination activities in your proposal. That is what will make your proposal successful and intelligible and easy to review for the reviewers going through these. So that's what success looks like. Thank you, Naomi.
Thanks, Jean. Yeah, that's great. And I just put in a direct link to the application instructions, where we do break down what level of detail we're looking for in terms of schedule and budget. We're happy to receive more detail. I don't think you have to have like every meeting and conversation mapped out over the course of the year, but we are looking for, you know, an understanding of your approach and your understanding of what it's going to actually take to deliver this work. And yeah, the dissemination plan, I think, as Jean said, has become increasingly important. And before, we had sort of a standard way that, you know, Energy Trust delivered this research, but we're really looking for a much more collaborative approach. And strategy from the fellow on how to get this work out there.
I can chime in on the dissemination piece. I think I didn't hear it mentioned already this morning, but just the piece of not only is it take it to our channels with, I'm sorry, I'm MLVITAS with the New Buildings Program, and I've been involved with the NOSER Fellowship process for a number of years. I love it. And Jean, thank you for your enthusiasm and your clarity around what it's meant to you to be a fellow. You've said it so well this morning. Thank you. And so the piece on the dissemination is truly, we don't want to have this be some study that gets put on a shelf and it's just there collecting dust. It's about, you've got a great idea. You see something that the world needs to understand better, or there's a barrier you see a pathway to overcome, or even just a barrier to expose and bring to light. That can be your research, and then think about how you could take it to who needs to hear it, who needs to understand it. That's how I see the dissemination piece. And we're moving toward, and Naomi, you're much closer to it, to where there can be a national audience for this research. There is certainly, we want to use the channels that Energy Trust New Buildings Program has to bring it to, as the webinars was mentioned, bring it to Central Oregon or Eastern Oregon or Southern Oregon, or more places where we're going in person with the research. And then the audience that you as the fellow see could most benefit for understanding this, whatever your topic is, better. And then perhaps there's a national audience for what you're going to be putting together too.
Yeah, thanks, ML. We are increasingly seeing national interest in these topics. And for those of you that aren't super familiar with the New Buildings Program, it is really a national model and pretty unique in the country. So we're encouraging fellows to think about, like, what are the national forums to, share the results of this research. So your dissemination plan could very well include national conferences. And we actually just had 2 proposals submitted to the New Buildings Institute's Getting to Zero Forum in Charlotte this May. And so one of those is Hannah Rusnak's research. So she's the fellow that just completed her research on embodied carbon. So there's clearly interest and appetite in supporting these topics nationally, and we're eager to support the fellows and see them take this to that scale of stage.
Thanks, everybody. My name's Sam Chipperfield. I'm with RDH Building Science. I was hoping you could just elaborate a little bit more about your distinction between new buildings. One of your topics was talking about office retrofits or conversions. A lot of the work that I specifically do, but it's not all that we do, is a lot of rehabilitation projects on existing buildings. It range from multifamily, senior housing, high rises, apartment buildings downtown. And a lot of what we do, like, we've worked with the Energy Trust of Oregon for, like, the rebate program. You get so much money for a window, so much for insulation, but it's all very piecemeal rather than looking at it holistically. Is there an opportunity for something like that to be considered, or are we more geared to looking at new buildings right now?
So what we're really interested in is those holistic solutions. And so that's why this program is really focused on, the New Buildings Program is focused on new construction and major renovations. So think about, if it's a major renovation that has the opportunity to think holistically about, systems, envelope, those strategies that can have a significant impact on Energy Trust, then it could be a fit. There's a little bit of a gray area on how that's defined, although maybe ML or Shelley, feel free to jump in if there's like a very specific definition that I don't know.
Yeah, thank you, Sam, for your question, because you're absolutely right that the typical new buildings project that's going to receive Energy Trust incentives would be from the ground up construction. It's new. Or it's an addition, so new square footage. Those are easy to sort to the New Buildings Program. A major renovation, another sort of simple way to see it would be, it was something and now it's going to be something else. So it was a church, it's going to become a restaurant. It was an office building, it's going to become multifamily. That's a clear code's going to come into play. And then in the kind of gray area, and we typically figure that out on a project by project basis, would be, it's an existing building, there's no change of use. Are the energy using systems being updated and changed perhaps? So another way to think about it would be, if you're just going in, you use the example of multifamily and windows. If you're just doing a window replacement, then there's not really anything changing other than what's in that window frame, that window opening.
Mhm.
Or if you're just changing out the heating and cooling system, but not, it's like a plug and play kind of upgrade, not looking, as you mentioned, holistically. So I'm not going to say 100% that this would fit. It does sound really intriguing. Like, it would be great to be able to say, here's a holistic approach to doing a major retrofit on existing multifamily that is comprehensively looking at the energy benefits and the non-energy benefits and the interactivity of those things, those energy efficient pieces. And then the decision making, like how do you help a building owner do that kind of renovation?
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
thanks.
that is exactly, sorry, that is exactly what I've done and I have done for the past 10 plus years now. And I think, I've worked with Kirk and his predecessor in terms of doing those single one-off rebates, because that kind of helped get the project over the line. But like a lot of what we do specifically from, Canadian predecessors is air barriers and making buildings more airtight and more energy efficient. And, multifamily and senior living, there's so many of those around, but there's no real quantifiable data that's been, looked at for a long period of time of how much less energy use is done in those buildings after a holistic repair project. Like, it is still pretty major. And then in addition to that, if we had done X, Y, and Z to even further improve it, how much energy would have been, how much energy use would have been done, used less by the occupants over a long period of time. And to me, that is a huge part of what getting to net zero is just reduction in energy use in existing buildings rather than focusing on new. And so that's what immediately jumped to my mind and got me excited about this. But but if it's slightly not what the goal, or like if you're still striving for new buildings, like I totally get that. And I don't want to.
Sam, I want to jump in
Yeah.
and say that major renovations are near and dear to my heart. And, the bottom line is that most of the buildings are already built, right? So if we begin to think about embodied carbon as an issue, those holistic renovations of existing buildings, and in particular, those historic buildings, that's where we have some real challenges, right?
Yes.
Those are of incredible interest to me. And the program as a whole, primarily works with new commercial construction because it is where we can do the best work, right? We have some challenges around major renovation, outside of the program, just their challenges. It's where our rural community often focus though. So there could be a real fit here. I'm intrigued.
Okay, great.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Sam. Okay.
Yeah.
Carolina, you got your hand up.
Good morning. I'm Carolina Gomez, and I am the Director of Facilities and Safety for Home Forward, which is the housing authority here in Portland. We do have a development department that do the construction and major renovations, and I work with specialty maintenance, safety, and environmental work. So what I'm looking for is exactly what you're talking about. And the reason why I'm here is exactly what you're talking about. There is programs where we can change an HVAC system and get some rebates, or windows and get some rebates. And I wanted to look at from sustainability safety, environmental perspective to do a holistic approach, looking at data, looking at equity, we do have approximately 100 properties that we own. We manage some of those properties, so we wanted to do it from that perspective. And we are not, in my case, we do not have a department of sustainability. We don't have those engineers to help us to do this work. And the funding that we have to do this work is limited. So I'm looking for relationships for all of you experts out there that I'm hearing music in my ears with what you were saying before I start speaking. And how we can look for partnerships, how we can look for data, how can you, the work that you've done, what has worked out and what hasn't worked out, and how we can do this work. All the people we serve are low income and vulnerable in Portland and in Gresham, and how we can do this work so that we start building the data, we start doing the work and looking at the future that we could do climate change and that we could start getting those long-term things. And this is going to take a long time, but we need those partnerships, and hopefully we can get engineers hired in the future, but we need the data to be able to do that. So far, it's my department, a small department that is trying to do that work for the buildings that we already own. And then we have another department that is working on the major rehabs and development on new construction, and they are already doing that work, but I am working with those old buildings, downtown Portland, or those buildings that are in segregated areas where they don't have resources and where they have old building systems. Anyway, I've talked a lot, so I'm just looking for information and resources. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Yeah, and you actually raise a critical gap that we have identified in the market and in the design process of new buildings and major renovations, which is really the facility managers and building operators. And I've long thought that we haven't had a fellowship that addresses that sort of stakeholder and that piece of the sort of design team. And it's critical to get the managers and operators familiar with these strategies, because they can either provide an opportunity or sort of be a barrier on the design team, often when they're brought in early. And so, yeah, it's absolutely a commitment of this program to bring in facility managers earlier in the design process and have them inform some of these strategies, because we know that, the best design building can, often doesn't operate doesn't have the level of performance as designed because of the way it's operated and managed. So I think there's a huge opportunity to think about both engagement of managers and operators and potentially training as well, and have them be sort of at the design table earlier. So that is I'd say a huge interest in this fellowships.
Do these dogs have a question? I'll be really excited to hear it. No. They're cute.
Other questions?
Sorry, I had a question in case I'm not sure if somebody was coming on.
Go for it.
Leonie, was that? Okay, it's sort of a follow-up to the conversation that we're having. I certainly have, I guess I'll start with, this is being over optimistic, but I mean, can you do more than one proposal? And the reason I ask that is, one of the proposals that I was thinking of definitely is sort of more in the arena of existing buildings. But then I assume that that's not okay. So the question I'm thinking I have right now is there an opportunity to connect prior to sending the submission with someone to say, hey, this is what I'm putting together. Is this going to be in line with what you're thinking about, since this is supposed to be more about new construction, new buildings program, before we sort of commit to only one proposal? Does that make sense? So that you're not putting all your eggs in one basket and then finding out that that was just a no go from the beginning.
Yeah. So a couple of responses. So we were not able to meet with folks individually to review proposal concepts. I would say if you have a question about whether it's a good fit or eligible, I would submit it through that email channel, and then we
Okay.
will clarify the response. You are absolutely welcome and invited to submit more than one proposal if you have two different ideas. So,
Okay.
um,
Great, thank you.
I have one more question. In terms of scalability, and data support, I guess, in thinking of the scale of the research project, is ETO able to support fellows with access to additional data that we know ETO might have access to?
ooh, this is always a good question and a surprisingly challenging answer. Shelley, do you want to jump in?
I do.
Okay.
What sort of energy trust data are you looking for?
Like building comprehensive building utility data from like Oregon, Washington region buildings, that kind of.
Okay, so like RBSA or
Yeah.
So okay. That one is that's a question mark for me. If you were to ask for specific customer data, I would have to say no, but that is a database that we pay for. And I think that's a really interesting question. Mostly it's planning folks who go in there and look at that, so I'm not terribly familiar with it. But I'd be happy to ask that question. I think there are some really interesting sets of data that we have access to, and I don't know what the rules are.
Fair enough, thank you.
I think typically data that's aggregated at a pretty high level can be shared. And what we've done to date is for the fellows that have studied particular buildings, we have had the fellow work with the building owner to sign some sort of disclosure and agreement to share their utility data, because the results of the research do get published pretty broadly. There might be some creative ways to keep it, for whatever's publicly shared, to keep it aggregated to sort of get away from some of those data concerns. But just of the research projects to date, it's been like a handful of buildings that are studied, and the fellow does work with building owners to share that data. But yeah, Shelley, I'll connect with you, and we can post that with the Q&As, that question about whether there's any sort of like, data sets that Energy Trust has access to that we could share.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Hi there, Galen Whalen with Hannaberry Eddy Architects. I'm just curious about projects or topics that lean kind of heavily away from specifically operational energy use. So if it's really focused on whether it's like kind of a post-occupancy focused qualitative down to embodied carbon, is that kind of seen as not a hit, but not as beneficial as something, just knowing that this is eventually kind of all about utilities? Should it really try and have a component that focuses on energy data in some way, essentially? If that makes sense.
I think it does. There is a lot of interest in embodied carbon, and I don't think it has to link necessarily to energy data. The work that's focused on embodied carbon to date has made some link back to operating emissions as well. But I don't think it necessarily has to. There is there's a lot of interest in sort of understanding post-occupancy performance, and that sort of like occupant behavior piece and how that impacts energy. But yeah, I'd say there's increasingly through both of these net zero grants, interest in embodied carbon. But Shelley might have more to say as well.
Yeah, I would just add to that, the utilities are really in need of more savings from us. So more energy savings as fast as we can get it. And to me, there's some kind of connection. So before Energy Trust long ago, I used to work for a concrete manufacturer in the state of Oregon. So, they're getting their energy somewhere. It is an energy intensive and a carbon intensive material. Like I'm looking for that connection. I just had a conversation with someone about that yesterday. What more can we do? How can we serve these utility customers better in some of these like really intensive energy spaces, both embodied and operational? So it's of interest.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions or ideas you want to float? This is great to hear what you're thinking about. It makes me excited to have the applications start rolling in.
Naomi, I just did want to share with people, I put the on-demand training link in the chat. It's a great way to see some past fellows presentations and how they're speaking to their research. So if you want to see some of those winning grants and how that culminated with great research and presentation, there's an opportunity to see it right now.
Thanks, Kriya. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, I think we will wrap up. I encourage you to submit an application. If you have a question, you can submit it through March 20th, and we will post an answer by April 1st. And yeah, and I think all this material that was shared today is available on the website in the application instructions and the application page. So yeah, feel free to refer to that. And yeah, look forward to reviewing your proposals. All right.
Thank you all for attending.
Thanks all for taking the time to chat with us. Take care.